Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Dark and Precious Storytime. I'm Dark.
And I'm Precious.
In this podcast, we flex our creative muscles and maybe your patience by narrating original stories complete with totally professional sound effects. This will be the best 30 minutes of your life you'll never get back. Today's episode is called The Swarm, where newspaper reporter Jerry Brannard finds out that even the ludicrous and ridiculous can still be deadly. My name is Jerry Brannard. If you're listening to this, I'm probably already dead. But that also means you should listen to what I have to say, since it might help you save yourself. It all started with an accident at the nuclear power plant in Vicante, Virginia. I was a reporter working for the Athersburg Gazette, a small daily newspaper in Athersburg, about 50 miles from Vicante. Like all other small-town newspapers in this digital age, we were pretty much out of business. I mostly wrote wedding announcements, ran obits, and published the minutes from the town council meetings. Soon after the accident, though, I got a call from Helen Stewart, my counterpart at the Vicante Times. She was noticeably agitated, but wouldn't divulge anything over the phone. She asked me to meet her in a remote area of Vicante. Naturally, I was concerned, but my professional curiosity was also piqued, so I agreed. A while later, I pulled into the parking lot where we had agreed to meet, and she stepped out of her car and ran over to mine, quickly sliding into the passenger seat. "Let's go, Jerry," she said, glancing around the parking lot. As I wheeled around and got back on the road, I asked her, "What's going on?" For the next half hour, she directed me through a maze of back roads, seemingly at random, while she explained. Vicante wasn't only home to the nuclear power plant, but also to a federal wildlife sanctuary and animal research facility that straddled the Boxwood Run, a river that ran through the town and eventually emptied into the James River. She explained. Soon after the incident at the plant, reports began to come in about animal mutilations. These reports included all kinds of animals, from livestock like cattle and sheep to domestic animals and even forest creatures, and they all shared a similarity. Each animal was essentially stripped to the bone. Hunters reported finding deer, elk, raccoon, and various other animal bones scattered throughout the woods. One hunter even found the bones of a black bear in a tree, as if it had tried to escape something on the ground. As these reports started coming in, Helen had been intrigued. After her first couple of stories, she began to discover some disturbing things, which was when she was visited by a government official named Owen, who explained that the authorities were working to contain the threat in the area. The man asked her to refrain from investigating or writing any more stories about the animal mutilation to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. Helen had laughed at him and reminded him of a little thing called the First Amendment. He had politely insisted that she reconsider. When she refused, he left. A few days later, she was accused of drinking on the job and fired from the newspaper. Her credit cards were canceled and her bank account frozen. At this point, I was incredulous. All this because he wrote about something that everyone already knows is happening? No, all this because of what I haven't written about. See, Jerry, in every case, there was no blood, and the bones were marked with thousands of tiny scratches. The fact that there's never any blood is so bizarre. Whenever swarm animals eat, there's a lot of debris. Skin, hair, meat are usually all over the place where the animal died. Helen continued. Also, there are odd little tracks all around the carcasses. These animals were killed by a swarm of something, Jerry, not a single creature. Something with lots of teeth and fast. Most of the animals looked like they were trying to get away, but were chased down and eaten alive. I was fascinated by her story, although I was having trouble believing if any of it was true, which was probably why she'd been fired. But Helen was a friend, and this was the most fun I'd had in months. So I played along. "What about the tracks?" I asked. "What kind of tracks were they?" "I'm glad you said that," Helen replied, "because this is what I wanted to show you." She directed me to pull off onto the shoulder of a dirt road. We got out of the car, and I followed her to stand next to a nearby field where the first sprigs of green were pushing through the soil. The far side of the field was marked by thick grass and bushes, and I glimpsed the surface of the river just beyond. Helen squatted at the edge of the field and beckoned me over. She pointed across the road to a barn about 200 yards away. There was yellow crime scene tape around it and the house next to it. 3 days ago, that farmer called the police to report something was hurting his cattle because they were mooing like crazy. The dispatcher said he heard the farmer's dog start squealing in the background right before the farmer himself started screaming and dropped the phone, but didn't disconnect the call. The dispatcher said the man's screams only lasted a few seconds. Then there was a loud buzzing noise. By the time the police got here, the farmer was just a pile of bones still inside his clothes, and every animal on the place was dead. Helen shifted and pointed to the dirt near the field. These go right up to the barn, but all the cars and people wiped them out, so nobody saw them. I stooped to see what she was pointing at. Hundreds of squiggly lines overlapped each other, with tiny divots here and there. At first glance, it seemed chaotic and random, but then I realized it was a trail. Once I recognized the pattern, I could see the lines originated in the bushes near the river, meandered through the field, crossed the road, and aimed in the general direction of the farm. I stood up and followed the tracks back across the field. The grass and leaves near the river's edge were tamped down where a swarm or whatever it was had passed through. Then the trail terminated at the water. I walked up and down the bank for several minutes looking for the trail on the other side of the river, but couldn't see anything. I turned to Helen, who'd said, "It's coming from the river, Jerry. Whatever it is, it's coming from the river. This isn't the only farm they've hit either. Just about every attack I've heard about has been close to the river. There's even been a couple other people killed, but the government's covering it up. They ruined my career to shut me up, but I was hoping you could get the word out. You can publish this before they sweep it under the rug and more people get hurt." My head was spinning. I'd known Helen a long time and trusted her professional instincts, but this was too crazy. "So you're telling me that some kind of amphibious carnivore is coming up on dry land to eat people, and it somehow eats everything without spilling a drop of blood, and it what, makes a buzzing noise? Is that about right?" "Yes," she said simply. "I know it's hard to believe, Jerry. I didn't believe it myself at first." I turned away in frustration, and something shiny in the matted grass caught my eye. I bent down and picked up a tiny, hard sliver, and noticed there were several more like it scattered in the grass. It was about the size of a postage stamp, roughly triangular in shape and had sharp edges. It was a pearly, translucent green color, and as I turned it over and over in my hand, I realized it was a fish scale, a big one. I held it up to Helen, and she shrugged. Suddenly, something erupted from the water and latched onto her arm. She screamed and swatted at it. "Ah, get it off!" But it was stuck fast, wiggling and burrowing. It looked like a fish, but with disproportionately large jaws and thick, sharp teeth, which were sunk deep into the meat of Helen's forearm. She screamed again, "Ah!" and I stepped forward to pull it off her when several more fish flew out of the water, landing in various places on her body. She screeched in pain and fear, "Ah!" tugging at the gnawing creatures as I stood dumbfounded, mouth agape, watching the water bubble and churn as more of the deadly fish swam toward the shore, toward Helen, toward me. I snapped out of my stupor and ran over to Helen, tearing at the fish embedding themselves in her flesh, but they just slipped free, their sharp scales slicing open the skin on my palm. One fish had burrowed into her chest, and her screams quickly softened to choking gasps. The first fish had stripped the flesh from her forearm, and I could see white bone as it continued squirming, making its way up her shoulder. Helen turned to me as more fish leaped out of the water, their additional weight suddenly causing her to overbalance and stagger backwards towards the water. Time seemed to slow down as she fell, and just before she was pulled under, I heard her raspy voice say, "Tell them, Jerry." Then the water turned red as the remaining fish joined in the feeding frenzy. For a moment, There was a vaguely human-shaped, swirling mass of fish, which dissipated to reveal a bright white skeleton that slowly sank to rest on the shallow bottom of the river. I screamed.
Yikes!
And couldn't take my eyes off the gleaming skull that had been my friend a minute ago. The water wasn't churning anymore, but I could see dark shapes flitting near the surface. My hand burned, and I looked down to see blood dripping from the cut in my palm. I heard a shuffling noise,
Shriek, shriek, shriek.
and looked over to see one of the fish perched in the grass, watching me. At first, I thought it had fallen off Helen when she stumbled into the water, but soon realized it had emerged from the water. As I watched in astonishment, it extended abnormally long flippers and pulled itself further into the grass and closer to me. Frozen with fear, I watched a second, then a third fish pull itself out of the water and squirm into the grass toward me. All at once, one of the fish launched itself at me, which broke my paralysis, and I ducked just as it sailed over my head, landing in the soft dirt of the field.
Thump.
I broke into a sprint, hearing the soft thuds of other fish as they landed in the dirt behind me.
Plop, plop, plop.
About halfway to my car, I risked a glance behind me and gasped in horror as I saw a horde of these killer fish slithering and jumping toward me. There must have been at least 100, dragging themselves along and somehow leaping. All at once, it clicked home for me. I remembered watching a documentary about the Amazon River where they featured a smaller version of these fish. These were piranhas. Giant, mutated piranhas. I began to laugh at the absurdity of it all. But as one of the animals narrowly missed my leg, I clamped down on the laughter and focused on running as fast as I could. I made it to my car and slammed the door shut just as the first fish landed on the hood with a wet plop.
Plop.
I started the car and backed up. Fish continued leaping onto the hood, squirming around as they searched for their next meal. Showing what I thought was an amazing presence of mind, I pulled out my phone and snapped a couple of pictures of the piranhas before I whipped the car around and sped off back down the dirt road, the remaining fish sliding off along the way. As I drove, I kept checking my rearview mirror for a flying cloud of the killer fish, but didn't see anything as I finally found a main road and sped toward town. I soon found the police station and screeched to a stop in front of the building. A few pedestrians gawked as I leaped out of the car and dashed inside. At the front desk, an older woman sat talking into a telephone. She didn't bat an eye as I ran up, wild-eyed and panting. She calmly finished her call and looked up at me with a pleasant smile on her face. "And how can I help you, sir?" "The fish! They attacked at the farm, from the river. Helen!" I was having trouble finding the words I needed. They ate her! Helen!" Her expression didn't change, but she scooted her chair back a few inches. I noticed I was spraying spittle on the clear plexiglass between us. I'm sorry, sir. Can you repeat that? Someone was attacked?" Yes! The fish, the piranhas. They ate the farmer, and they ate Helen. They came from the river, and they ate her." I knew I was babbling, but the enormity of it all was starting to sink in. An officer noticed my wild gestures and raised voice, and sauntered over to stand next to the woman, patting her on the shoulder. I noticed his nameplate read Steiner. "Hello, sir. Let's calm down a bit and start at the beginning." I knew he was being reasonable, but all I kept seeing was Helen's denuded forearm and the mass of squirming fish as they pulled her under the water. I took a shaky breath and tried to calm myself. "My name is Jerry Brannard. I'm a reporter from Adlersburg. I was working with Helen from the Visconti paper, and we went out to the farm where the farmer and his livestock were killed." The officer stiffened at the mention of the crime scene, and his gaze narrowed as he leaned in towards me. "You visited a crime scene? With Helen?" The older woman piped in. "I thought Helen was fired for being a drunk or something." No. Helen was fired because they were trying to cover something up," I said. "She knew what's been killing all the animals and people in the area. Then we followed the trail to the river, and that's when they ate her." "Who ate her?" Steiner said as he and the older woman leaned towards me. I knew how ridiculous it sounded, so I tried to be vague. It was a swarm of big fish." "School," the old woman said. What? I was confused. I believe they call it a school of fish, she corrected me. I just stared at her for a moment and then turned back to the officer, who had produced a yellow legal pad and was making some notes. So you're saying that you and Helen from the Vicanti newspaper visited an active crime scene. Then she was eaten? He asked. Yes. By fish? Yes. So she fell into the water and the fish ate her? No, the fish jumped out of the water and attacked her. They jumped out of the water. He cocked his head and raised an eyebrow. The older woman smirked and walked away. Yes, I confirmed. So they only attacked her, but not you. Well, they tried, but I was able to get to my car before they caught me, I explained. Caught you? So these fish jumped out of the water and, what, chased you? Across dry land? Yes, exactly. They kind of pull themselves along the ground, and they can jump up really high, I said, emphasizing this by holding my hand over my head to indicate how high I'd seen them jump. Huh. The officer stopped writing and peered at me, the corners of his mouth ticking upward. So you and Helen were attacked by fish that can walk and jump and survive out of the water, is that right? Yes, and these were larger than normal piranhas, too. He burst out laughing. Piranhas? Oh, why didn't you say so? His loud laugh was joined by others, and I saw the old woman had gathered a group of officers who were all listening to my story, and they were all laughing. Steiner dabbed at the corner of his eye and shook his head. I knew how it sounded, but I couldn't get the image of Helen's grisly death out of my head, so I started shouting. What don't you understand? Helen was killed. These giant, mutant, flying piranhas ate her. I banged on the plexiglass for emphasis, and a couple officers appeared on either side of me, each firmly grabbing one of my arms. I struggled as they led me through a door into a small jail cell. Why don't you calm down for a minute, one of them said as they frisked me, relieving me of my watch, wallet, and phone.
Whew, I'm so relieved.
They walked away as I yelled after them, They'll eat you too! They'll eat all of us! My terror had consumed me, and I admit it wasn't one of my finer moments. I could see the officers gathered in the bullpen, talking in low voices, occasionally glancing over at me. I banged on the bars for a few minutes to get their attention.
Bang, bang, bang.
But they ignored me, so I collapsed onto a bunk and stretched out. I kept replaying the horror of Helen's grisly death in my head, but eventually the trauma and stress caught up to me, and I drifted off into a fitful sleep. I awoke to a banging sound and voices raised in panic.
Bang, bang. Help us! Help us!
I stood slowly and walked over to the bars. A couple of officers were frantically rifling through desk drawers, and I could hear the faint sounds of a commotion outside. Hey! I called to the officers. The one closest to me jerked his head up in surprise. What's going on out there? He said something to the other officer, who looked at me and with a look of recognition on his face, ran over to my cell. I shrank back at the wild light in his eyes. You're the one that was talking about the fish. What are they? Where'd they come from? How do you kill them? He shouted this last question as the first officer joined him at the bars, fumbling with a key ring. I don't know, I said. What happened? They happened, man. They're eating everyone, and they can fly. They ate Carl and Hector, man. Ate them down to the bone in seconds like... I blinked away the spittle from my eyes as his partner unlocked the cell door and pulled me roughly into the hallway. The piranhas? You've seen them? I asked as I stumbled out into the lobby. They're everywhere, man. They're coming for us, and we can't kill them. The crazed officer stopped, and his eyes widened as he stared past me. I turned to look out the large windows that made up the front wall of the police station just in time to see several balls of flame drift by. They floated lazily in the air, and I thought they were debris from a building fire or something. That is, until I watched a young man come out of the ice cream shop across the street. He turned and walked down the sidewalk, attention focused on the ice cream cone in his hand. Immediately, the fireballs reversed direction and hurled at the man, and I realized they were piranhas, giant, mutated flying piranhas that were on fire. No! I ran to the window and banged on it.
Bang, bang.
But it was too late. The flaming piranhas slammed into the man, driving him to the ground and setting his clothes on fire. I could hear him screaming as they burrowed into him.
Owie, 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 owie.
He thrashed and rolled for a moment, but was soon still. The police officers stood next to me, mouths open in amazement, just as mine had been when Helen was attacked. Their belt radios began to squawk.
Squawk.
And I could hear other officers trying to report, calling for backup, or simply screaming incoherently.
Ah!
More and more of the flaming fish wafted by, defying physics and the laws of reality as they floated on the breeze. I heard booming noises down the street and
Boom, boom.
pressed my head to the glass, looking in the direction of the noise. I saw Steiner, elbows propped on the roof of his patrol car that was parked sideways across both lanes of the street, calmly blasting the fish out of the air with a shotgun as if he was shooting skeet. As I watched, he ran out of ammunition and ducked into his car just as a bunch of the flaming fish slammed into his windshield. Luckily, he closed his door before they reached him, and I sighed with relief.
Whew.
Just as a huge gas tanker truck, covered with flames, careened through the intersection behind him and T-boned the police cruiser, crushing it as the truck plowed through parked cars and eventually smashed into the side of a bank building. I winced and looked away, my eyes falling on my car. Wait, my car, that's right. I'd parked in front of the station. I turned to the officers. The one who'd screamed at me earlier was just standing there, staring blankly out the window. The other one was walking back to the bullpen, listening to his radio. Hey! I ran after him, following him into the bullpen. I need my stuff. He kept walking and pointed in the general direction of the front counter, so I searched through the drawers until I found my belongings, including my car keys. The officer was now sitting at a desk, hands flat on the blotter, head cocked and listening to the mayhem crackling on the radio. I called to him again. Can you give me like a gun or a shotgun or something? He looked at me briefly, scrunching his features into an as-if expression, and went back to staring straight ahead as he listened to the radio. I groaned in frustration and ran through the lobby past the other officer, who was still standing at the window. I pushed the door open far enough to poke my head out. There was still a few random fireballs drifting around at the far end of the street, so I made it to my car without incident. I started it up and began to drive. I was amazed at the amount of damage and pandemonium. Charred skeletons littered the streets, and fires burned everywhere. Occasionally I would see the lazily floating fireballs coalesce into a group and hone in on a target, but they were always too far away for me to help, so I just kept driving. As I reached the outskirts of the town, however, I saw that 2 large military trucks blocked the road, and soldiers bristling with guns stood behind sandbag barricades. One soldier ran out and held up his hand officially as I approached. I pulled to a stop, glancing behind me to see if any of the flaming piranhas were pursuing me. I didn't see anything, so I relaxed a little bit. The soldier kept his hand up as he approached, and I stepped out of the car. "Sir, get back in your vehicle and turn around," he said, pointing back in the direction I'd come from. "Turn around? Have you seen what's going on?" I pointed back at the town just as something exploded with a loud whomp in the distance. "We are equipped to deal with the threat, sir." The soldier nodded toward a pair of men who had big flamethrowers strapped to their backs. Those are flamethrowers," I said, confused. "Yes, sir. We'll fry them if they get too close," he said with a small grin. The 2 other men fist-bumped each other. "But these things are already on fire," I reminded him. A dull pain had started throbbing in the middle of my forehead. Yeah, but our fire is, hotter?" The soldier looked back at the 2 men, who just shrugged. "Besides, if the flamethrowers don't work, we have other weapons." He pointed his chin towards some large cannons mounted to a water tank on a tractor trailer. "What are those?" I asked. "Water cannons, sir. If the fire doesn't work, we'll just drown the fiery little suckers," he explained proudly. "Water cannons?" I was incredulous. The soldier nodded, still grinning. "Let me get this straight." I pinched the bridge of my nose and squeezed my eyes shut against the dull pain. "You're going to try burning those things that are already on fire, and if that doesn't work," I pointed again at the water cannons, "you're going to drown them with those. Is that it?" "Yes, sir." The grin was back. He began to usher me back to my car. So if you'll return to your home and make sure all the doors and windows are... I turned and screamed in his face. They're fish, you morons! Your plan is to spray water on goddamn flying fish? Are you kidding me? The soldier's grin faltered, and the other men behind him started murmuring uneasily.
Well, he has a point.
Let me by, soldier. I need to leave, I told him. Regaining his earlier stoicism, the soldier stood straighter and said, No, sir. You need to return to your home, close all doors, and cover all windows while we engage and eliminate the threat. I let out a cry of disgust and got back in my car, squealing the tires as I headed back into town. I tried the other streets leading out of town, but encountered the same roadblocks at each one. However, on the last street I tried, the roadblock was on fire, and there were charred bodies everywhere. I could see patches where the flamethrowers had scorched the grass next to the road, and there were huge puddles of water from the water cannons, which were unmanned. I didn't see any of the mutant piranhas, so I got out of my car, waiting for a count of 30 before I walked up to the barricade. It looked like someone had rammed it with a pickup truck, which was now a hulking mass of burnt and twisted metal. There was no way to drive around, and I couldn't risk trying to leave on foot. So I turned to get back in my car when I heard a wheezing cry for help from one of the military jeeps.
Help me.
I whirled toward the sound and ran to the jeep to find a young lieutenant gasping for breath. He was holding a pistol in one hand and his stomach in the other. Half of his face and scalp were severely burned, and it looked like he was sitting in a pool of his own blood. When he turned to look at me, the burnt skin made a horrid, crackling sound. Although I knew basic first aid, there was nothing I could do for him, so I just stared helplessly as he whispered something.
Psst, hey.
I leaned closer to hear what he was saying. Help me. Too much pain. Shoot me. He pushed his pistol into my hands. I looked down and saw the pistol was empty. I couldn't see any other magazines or ammunition, so even if I wanted to put him out of his misery, I couldn't. He must have read my expression because he sighed in despair and slumped back into the seat. Then he reached out with surprising strength and grabbed my shirt, pulling me close so he could talk into my ear. The smell was nauseating, but I held my breath. Nuke! Coming, he said. Nuke? What do you mean? I looked into his destroyed face. They're going to nuke the town. Make it look like an accident, he gasped. My blood ran cold. Why? When? I stammered in disbelief. Somehow I could wrap my head around mutant flying piranhas, but the idea of my government dropping a nuclear bomb on a town was shorting out my brain. Soon. 2100 hours, he wheezed. I did a quick conversion of the military time. 9 p.m. I looked at my watch. It was 8:30. How do I get out of this town? Where are the soldiers going? Is there a bomb shelter nearby? I pelted him with questions, grabbing his shirt in desperation. Then I quickly let go when he yelped in pain. Shelter at the bank and the school. His voice was growing weaker. I tried to pull him out of the seat and carry him to safety, but he just cried out in pain again.
Owie, owie, owie.
Just go, he managed before passing out, or maybe dying. I couldn't tell, but knew I also couldn't stay there. I thought I heard a buzzing noise somewhere close.
Bzzz.
So I sprinted back to my car and jumped in, slamming the door.
Slam.
Off in the distance, in the trees, past the barricade, I could see shapes moving through the trees. Some were small, about the size of a house cat, while others were huge and seemed to have multiple arms. This was getting goddamn ridiculous. Remembering the truck that had run into the bank, I drove a few blocks back to that building. The tanker had mostly burned itself out, and the bank wall had collapsed around the cab of the truck. I parked facing down the street toward the police station. I thought about returning there to collect the two officers, but then several flaming fish floated out the obviously shattered front window. I shook my head and hurried to the front door of the bank as the buzzing sound increased.
Bzzz.
The door was locked. I looked down the street where about a dozen more of the flying piranhas joined the ones from the police station and started drifting my way. Some were on fire, others weren't. I dashed to the wall where the truck had crashed. There was just enough room for me to squeeze through underneath the smoldering cab of the truck, so I dropped to my belly and started shimmying. The buzzing was even louder.
Bzzz.
And I knew the piranhas had probably caught my scent, or whatever it is they do. So I pushed myself faster and felt something hit my foot and heard a grinding noise. I yanked my leg through and my shoe caught on something, so I gave another terrific yank and my shoe came off. When I looked back in the hole I'd just crawled out of, there was a piranha sitting next to my shoe, with a neat circular hole where it had chewed through the leather. Another second and would have been eating my foot. The fish sat there staring at me, and then I saw it tense and leap toward me. Thankfully, it misjudged and slammed into the underside of the cab.
Thump.
There were several pieces of crumbled brick and masonry mixed with the dust from the collapsed wall, so I pushed a couple of large pieces of masonry to block the hole and scrambled to my feet. I could hear thumps and plops
Thump. Plop.
as the piranhas probed the wall, looking for openings. I slid across the bank teller counter and saw the bank vault standing open, along with two other doors. One door led to a small office with windows, not what I was looking for. The other led to a short hallway where there was a bathroom, another office, and a stairway leading down. That must be it. I glanced behind me at the lobby and gasped in terror. Piranhas were spilling over the top of the truck and plopping on the floor.
Plop, 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 plop.
I could hear them scurrying across the hard tile toward the counter. So I slammed the door shut.
Slam.
Made it to the top of the stairs just as the first fish hit the door. I could hear that grinding sound again, and then a cacophony of thumps as more of them hit.
Thump, 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 thump.
The old wooden door began to vibrate and rattle as the grinding sound increased. Splinters fell from the door, and I saw a hint of light as the first fish chewed its way through.
Nom, 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 nom.
I raced down the stairs to a basement. It was small, with cinder block walls and narrow barred windows that let in modest light. My heart sank
Oh.
as I realized this wasn't any kind of shelter at all. I heard the lobby door fall open with a crack and a chorus of thumps and scrapes as the killer fish made their way down the hall to the stairs.
Thump, 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 thump. Creak, creak, creak.
I frantically searched for something I could use as a weapon when I saw a steel door under the stairwell. Boxes had been piled in front of it, so I hadn't seen it at first glance. I ran over and pushed the boxes out of the way, tugging at the steel handle. It wouldn't budge. I wrenched furiously as the first couple of fish started bouncing down the stairs.
Boing, boing, boing.
I heard the now familiar plop
Plop.
and looked over at the foot of the stairs. One of the piranhas was staring at me. It could have been the one that tried to eat my shoe for all I knew. I could see it tensing to leap, so I reached out and shoved the stack of boxes over in front of me as it left the ground. I heard it slam into a box,
Slam.
and then a satisfying splat as the toppling boxes crushed it.
Splat.
"Ha!" I shouted. "Take that, you bastard!" Then there were more plops as more piranhas landed at the bottom of the steps.
Plop, 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 plop.
Uh-oh. I turned back to the door and saw there was a heavy latch that needed to be pulled, so I wrestled it out of the groove and pulled the handle again. This time the door opened freely and I dashed inside, pulling the door closed as the fish flung themselves against it, making tiny pinging noises as they collided with the heavy steel.
Bing, bing, bing.
I was in complete darkness, so I pulled my phone out of my pocket and used the light to find another latch on the inside of the door. I pushed it home and backed into the room, playing my light around. The walls were steel, and it looked like they might be connected to the bank vault upstairs. There were a couple of fold-down cots on the walls, and I could see canned goods and bottled water on some shelves in the corner. Apparently this room was also used for storage, since there were more boxes stacked along one wall. The door was pinging like crazy.
Ping, 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 ping.
There must have been hundreds of crazed piranhas by now, throwing themselves against the heavy steel. I fervently hoped they wouldn't chew through the steel until, I looked at my phone again, 8:40 p.m. 20 minutes until the government nuked the town of Vicante and covered up what was probably the worst biological disaster in history. Not surprisingly, I didn't have any cell reception on my phone, and my battery was down to less than 10%. I sat down on one of the bunks and resigned myself to dying, either by nuclear fire, mutant piranha, or simple dehydration if my supplies ran out before I was rescued. I started to cry a thin stream of self-pitying tears.
Why?
When I spied an old tape recorder and microphone on a shelf by the food supplies. I pulled them down and was amazed to find they still worked. I thought of Helen and remembered what she had asked me to do, to tell the world this story. Hell, I'm a newspaper reporter, am I not? I figured finding this tape recorder was a sign, a chance to tell the whole story. So I grabbed a bottle of water, perched on the cot with my back to the wall, and with the occasional faint ping from the steel door serving as punctuation,
Bing!
I pressed record and began to speak. My name is Jerry Brannard. If you're listening to this, I'm probably already dead. Okay, so what do you think of the story?
I still can't believe that there were flying, flaming piranhas. So, why piranhas, Dark?
Well, like most of my stories, this was autobiographical.
So you've come across giant, flying, flaming piranhas that walk on land.
It could happen.
Okay.
No, I saw a movie when I was a kid called Piranhas. And it was one of those ridiculous B-rated movies, typical 70s schlock. And it was the dumbest thing ever, and it scared the crap out of me to the point where to this day, I really don't want to swim in any freshwater, like rivers or lakes, because part of my primal brain is convinced that I'll be eaten by piranhas.
But swimming pools are okay.
Swimming pools are fine because, the chlorine.
Oh, I see. So chlorine is like fatal to piranhas.
Well, and a swimming pool is a closed system. It's just, it's a pool.
But anybody could just drop piranhas into the pool.
Well, you know what? If somebody dropped a piranha in the pool while I'm swimming, then chances are I would probably see it. And I would be able to react and kill them or whatever. But I'm talking about if I could see the piranha in the pool too, right? The pools are clear. You can't see in the rivers or the lakes. So think about that next time you're swimming and you're just like zipping around on your little inner tube behind the boat and you fall off and you're like treading water and you feel something like tickling your feet. It's probably not the little plants in the bottom of the lake. It's probably the piranhas that are like tasting you to see how yummy you are.
We have at least one listener who hates you right now. Because he'll never be able to swim in a lake or river ever again.
Well, you know what? I feel like I should just spread the joy. Welcome to my world of not swimming ever again in a river or lake.
Well, with that, I think we should go because this story was really long.
The story was really long, but this is episode 5. So if you've stuck with us this long, we appreciate you hanging out with us and listening to our stuff. And please tell all of your friends about us because, you probably have more friends than we do. But yes, I guess you're right. We should probably bring it to a close, but
yet you keep rambling on.
I keep rambling on because I feel like I should kill time.
Why? You don't need to kill time. Time is killed.
It's dead.
It's dead.
Okay, fine. You're right. This was a long episode. Wanted to give you something a little bit different than the norm. But we do appreciate you sticking with us for 5 episodes, and we hope to see you on episode 10 and 15 and 20 and so on and so forth. But until next time, I'm Dark.
I'm Precious.
See you soon.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed listening to our story as much as we enjoyed telling it. We're pretty sure you have more friends than we do, so be sure to tell them all about us and click to follow our podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at dark.n.precious or follow us on Facebook at Dark&Precious Storytime. Feel free to leave us any feedback or if you have any story suggestions. Who knows? You might just hear your story idea come to life in the next episode of Dark and Precious Storytime.